Hello, welcome to the High Vibe CEO Show. I'm your host, Janine Roberts. This show is all about exploring the mindset, strategies, and high vibe energy that it takes to grow a thriving business and live your most aligned life as a high vibe CEO. And today I am thrilled to introduce our guest, Dr. Michelle Vann. She is a speaker, author, educator, holistic wellness coach, doing all the things. She helps women, especially women of color, be their absolute best selves. I'm so excited to have you here today, Michelle. Welcome.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. And I would love to begin by just learning more about you. Tell us a little more about you. Who is Michelle?
So I'm just a regular old girl from around the corner. I'm a wife. I'm a mom. I'm an educator. I think I've been an educator since I was a little kid. That's just who I am. And my husband is a pastor, so we dibble dabble in ministry. And
Yeah. So you say you're just a normal girl, but I know there's a doctor in front of that name. So Dr. Michelle Vann, tell us about that. What's your doctorate in?
my doctorate is in Christian counseling, and
Okay.
just as I was working through figuring out exactly what I wanted to do when I grew up, which I still haven't completely figured out, but
Me too.
um, yeah, that was part of that. It's just making sure that there was some credibility behind the coaching.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your business. It says you're a speaker, you're an author, a wellness coach. Tell us a little bit about what Michelle does.
So when I was an educator for I taught public school for about 20 years, right at 20 years, and kind of hit the wall, and in my last couple of years, and decided that public education, or education with middle school kids specifically, was no longer what God was calling for me to do. And
So you did that for 20 years.
I did.
You taught middle school kids for 20 years.
I taught middle school I taught first and second grade for about 7 years.
Okay, those are cuter.
And then I taught, well, that's what you say. I worked with so those are teachers that are still trying to get their certification. So I did that for about 3 years. And then the rest of my time was with middle schoolers. So I was I taught sixth grade 1 or 2 years, and then everything else was 8th grade.
Yeah, well, middle school's tough. Like I remember when my kids were middle schoolers, they were weird. They were, it's just a very awkward time. You've got puberty, you've got, they start liking, boys and girls, and they just get really weird around that time. So
my friends would be like, "Oh my God, you're turning into one of those middle school kids." But it was amazing. We could have amazing conversations, and that was why I went from a 2nd grade classroom to an 8th grade classroom, and so spent a good amount of time there. But kind of hit the wall, and it was time. And really, that's how I wrote my first book. I had a kid. As a teacher, you have that Christmas break off, winter break, whatever you want to call it. Right. And I came back, I had these amazing lessons, and we were going to talk about how we were going to be, we were closer to being high schoolers than we were 8th graders at this point. We were, 4 years away from being adults. We were going to, history. So we talked a lot about how we were going to be citizens and what we were going to do to produce. And so we were talking about teamwork, and we were making vision boards and all of this stuff. And I mean, it was amazing. And I
love that.
I had this kid who, and before you judge me, I'm okay with it. He slept every day. But I could wake him up and he could tell me exactly what I said. And I could wake him up and he could take a test, and he was fine. So whatever he was doing was working for him. I let him do it because it kept him out of trouble.
Yeah.
This particular day, he was awake. He had slept a lot for Christmas break, and raises his hand and says, "Yeah, this is all fine and good, but what are you going to do with your life?" What, little boy?
Wow.
what are you talking about? At that time, I didn't have my doctorate. I had my master's and I had my bachelor's. And I was like, I have 2 degrees. My name is on the door. What are you talking about, little boy? But I couldn't get it out of my head. Like, what was I going to do? He was like, I mean, we love you here and all that, but like, is middle school all you're supposed to be doing in your life? You're supposed to be
Wow.
little snotty-nosed kids. Is that really
That was very profound from a 13-year-old.
But the thing about it is, when you set that atmosphere, that's what you got.
Yeah.
I
love that.
I got these kids. I got these kind of conversations because that was how I set the ground rules for our class, that I wanted them to be curious. I wanted them to ask questions. I wanted them to be at that place where they were pushing against what was the establishment. And so I was mad. I couldn't get it out of my head, and it sent me on this journey. And so the very first book that I wrote was Stop the Merry-Go-Round, I Want to Get Off. Mainly because for a lot of times, especially for women, we wander in these same places. And God took me to the children of Israel and how they wandered for 40 years on what should have been an 11-day journey. And many of us are doing that. We're wandering on these journeys and we're going round and round and we're seeing the same things over and over again in our lives. But we've never taken the time to just stop the ride and get off so that we can change the direction we're going.
Wow. Yeah. I love that. Stop the merry-go-round. I want to get off. That's I love the title, but that's really deep and that's really true. We are natural overthinkers, and we're also natural perfectionists. And so a lot of times, I work with women doing coaching who are so afraid to start because they don't have it just right. They don't have everything perfect. They don't have, this and that. And, and because they're overthinking it and they're procrastinating. And, I just think that's, part of it too. So, so I love that. Get off the merry-go-round and, and get to your purpose, get to your dreams. Yeah.
Well, and I think the thing about it is when we think about a merry-go-round, sometimes we're mesmerized by the music. Sometimes we're disillusioned by the trick mirrors that are there. And so because of those things, we can be distracted from being in our purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you're a wellness coach, right? Like a holistic wellness coach. So tell us a little bit more about that. What does that involve?
So it really involves looking at how do your mind, body, and spirit work together. If any of those three are out of whack, then you are. If your mind is not, well-rounded and moving in the ways that it should go, if your body is tired and not nourished well, that's a pull. And so, and often we don't think about our spirit. I have a friend who will often ask, instead of asking how are you, she'll say how is your spirit. And people that are over religious will be like, oh my gosh, why would you ask that? But I think the thing is that a lot of times we don't ask about a person's spirit, and sometimes that's the thing that's the most vital. Yeah. I'm weary in my spirit. My soul is weary. We do all of these things for everybody, but who is the person that is pouring into me? How am I being filled up? How is my love tank being restored and renewed? And that's, not about sex and not about, any of those other weird sorts of things, but it literally is, how am I in relationship and how do I put myself in relationship with people in a way that fills me? And so when I'm looking at coaching and when I'm talking to women, it really is about how do you bring that faith component into your life? That may be that you go to church, might not be. That's up to you how you live out that faith. But we understand scientifically that when a person has faith in their life, they heal faster. Yeah. They've done it. They've done studies with people that have had surgeries that heal faster when faith is a part of their life. They are able to overcome depression and other suicidal ideations and things of that nature when their faith is intact. I know for me, I have been in and around church all of my life, but there are times when, even in that, you can still lose faith. You can lose Peter was walking on the water, but then he took his eyes off. And there are times when we can take our eyes off of what is our prize, what is our goal, and we can faint. And so, even having my own mental health struggle with depression, I know that it was really, when I could get reconnected, when I could get my faith back where it needed to be, where I wasn't looking at people, I was looking at God, I could get myself back on track.
Okay.
And so that's really what
and that's what you teach. That's what you teach women. That's your coaching program.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So, what would you say has been your biggest mindset block when it comes to anything, like whether it comes to like when you first started your coaching business, when you first started writing your books? What would you say has been your biggest mindset block, and how did you deal with it? How did you overcome it?
I think for most of us, especially women, myself included, our biggest mindset block is shame. When we have experienced shame, whether that's because we've been rejected, because we have had an area, I think you started off by talking about, the fact that we feel like we have to be perfect. Well, no one's perfect. So there's this piece in which shame can rear its ugly head. And so I think for me and for most women, that's the biggest piece. And so then it really becomes this exercise of beginning to love yourself, to detach yourself from the words that other people have planted inside of you. Because I had a coach that told me, she was like, when we think about many things, we feel like we have to do all of these things. We have to, I'm old enough that I remember the Angelique commercials, you could bring home the bacon, fry it up in the pan, never let your man forget he's a man because I'm a woman. And, there's that piece of which I don't have to do that. I don't have to be every woman. I can just be me. And, me today might mean that I cook dinner, but me today might mean that I stop at, the local market and I buy dinner and I bring it home. And it's okay.
Right.
I don't have to feel shame because I didn't make a full course meal. I don't have to feel shame because I washed the clothes, they still in the dryer and I haven't put them up.
Yeah.
I don't have to feel shame about that. And I don't have to, try to make up some story. It's okay. It's okay that some days I'm not okay. That's
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just can't stay there. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is really having conversations with women to say, you know what, that's okay. I hear you. I see you. I understand where you're coming from. And,
yeah, because it's okay to feel our feelings. Just don't stay lost in those feelings.
Yep. My grandfather used to say all the time, I don't know any Model T Ford that hits on every cylinder every single day. He was like, and I may not either.
I love that. That's awesome. So, what would you say then is maybe the biggest lesson that you've learned over your, over your entrepreneurial career?
Entrepreneurial career. So, I think for us, my husband and myself, it really has been trust your instinct. There are some times when I have listened to other people and had to come all the way back to what I know God told me at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes you believe other people's stories and you go with, because they had success. Know that just because that was somebody else's path doesn't mean it's yours. And just because they were successful in doing it that way doesn't mean that you're going to be.
Yeah. And one of my favorite quotes is, comparison is the thief of joy. And, that's another thing that a lot of women do, is we compare ourselves to other women, how they look, how they dress, how they act, and then social media really makes it worse because, on social media, we just get the the highlights, right? Like you get the highlight reels, all the things that are going good in your life. And so, so many people on there can look like celebrities, but they still have normal life. They just don't put those things on. They still have bad days. They just don't put it on social media. Some people do, but I'm just saying the ones that look the most successful, they still have struggles and they still have normal
Long
issues
as
that
you have
everyone
flesh,
has.
long as you have flesh and you don't have an angelic body, you're going to have troubles.
Exactly. So, so we get into this thing where we're comparing ourselves and wanting to be like this person or that person, when in reality, we just need to be ourselves. We all are so unique. We just need to be, I just need to be me, you just need to be you, and that's going to help someone, right? That's going to help people. And it took me a long time to realize that, because I wanted to be like this coach or this mentor or this trainer. And I finally came to the realization that no, I'm just going to be Janine, and I'm going to teach and help women with what I know, with what I've done. And it's going to reach the right people. I don't have to reach everyone. You're never going to reach everyone, but you can reach the right people that you're supposed to reach. And there's going to be that group of women who resonate with what you're saying. So, yeah. And the same with you. I know that you work, especially with women of color, and that's really your niche, where you can make the biggest impact, and that's where you need
where
to be.
I have the biggest story.
Yeah.
I mean, I can talk about what my life experience has been, and so there are some unique, culturally, there are unique things that happen in every culture. So there are some experiences that I can share with women, when it comes down to I've been the only in many spaces. And so what does that experience look like when you are the only?
Yeah. So can you share some of that here today? Just maybe one of those experiences?
I mean, in education and teaching, there were many times when I was the only Black educator in a building. The only other people that were of color were the janitors and the people that worked in the cafeteria. And so that becomes a very difficult thing when you are the only. Then everybody comes and looks at you. I had a very similar experience. My daughter had a similar experience, because the school where we lived in the country, and so the school that we went to, she was the only Black girl. And so anytime something happened Black within the text that they were reading, they would look at her and she was like, I don't know, I just know what happens in my house. And so, there are those times when you just, how do you help someone walk through that space when maybe they're the only one at the table, they're the only one in their department, they're the only one in their company. And there are things that are said, and our world is becoming more polarized. And so people feel very okay to say whatever comes to their mind. How do you deal with that in your job?
Yeah. And so how did that affect you, being the only one in that school as a teacher? I mean, how did it make you feel, and how did you feel like it affected you?
Well, I mean, so you learn who your allies are. You learn who you can say what to, and you spend a lot of time to yourself.
Yeah.
And you get filled up when you leave that space. But it also makes you very aware of how children are being treated. When you are in sectors in which you are probably the only one, that some of them are looking and saying, oh, but you look like me, so can you help me? I've had students, we just had a young lady that was in the plane crash in DC. Her little brother, his locker was right next to my room when I taught 6th grade. And so there would be times when he was the only Black kid in some of his classes, and he would say, I got to come and sit in your room for a minute. I just got to, I can't. And so it was okay. Can you give me a hug? My mama's not here. Okay, I got you. And so
Yeah.
sometimes you just need to be that person. And
Yeah. Yeah.
for me,
No,
a
I
lot,
love that.
that was why I was in the spaces that I was in. And I didn't mind being sometimes in those spaces where it was uncomfortable for me, but it gave it gave those kiddos that maybe weren't in my class, but they could see their mom, their aunt, their grandma in me. And they would be, hey, can I come talk? Hey, they don't
Yeah.
know me, but they're giving me a hug. Can you
Yeah.
please hug me? Okay.
Oh, wow. So that's awesome that you were able to be that person for them, and and their advocate. So, what do you specifically teach on when you're teaching? Like let's say you get a new coaching client, where do you usually start?
Most of the time I'm looking at their story. So as a history teacher, I was always fascinated by stories. I still am. I go to funerals or listen to funerals sometimes, and people are like, "That's so weird." No, it really isn't about the funeral. It really is about the story. I want to get to know the person, and people will tell stories. And unfortunately, we don't tell stories when people are alive. But people, you get to know, you get to see, you get to have these backstories, these amazing epithets of who a person was
Yeah.
in ways that we don't get to always see when they're alive. And so I think for me, that's really where I start. What's your story?
What's your story? I love that. I love
You
that.
know, if this was the last day of your life, what would you want people to say about you? And then, because we always see the bad in ourselves. We see good in everybody else, but we see our own pimples, we see our own stretch marks, we see our own wrinkles. Um, then we
Yeah.
start those conversations. What are your wrinkles? Where are your stretch marks? Where are the things? What is the thing that holds you back, that keeps you from being able to move in the way that you think you should?
Yeah. No, I love that. And that's so good that you start with their story, because so many women feel not heard, and starting at that point really helps to build that connection and that relationship, because they're finally being heard. Someone actually wants them to tell their story. So I love that that's where you start, because stories are so important. And in the society we are in, we are all, everything's so fast, and people don't take time anymore to really connect, and they don't take time to even really learn about a person. Even in relationships, you see it in relationships. People are dating, and you're like, they don't know really anything about the person, only the things they want to know, right? Like there's things they want to know, but then they don't really get to know them, and really dig deep, and really know, like, what's their dreams, and what's their goals, and what's their favorite food. Even sometimes they don't even get that deep. So we live in such a, I guess, fast-paced society that we've really lost that connection. and
It's real
and
superficial.
yeah, yeah, for sure. It is. So if you could go back in time, when did you start when did you leave education and start your own kind of thing? How long has
Uh,
that been?
2017, 2017.
Okay, so it's been 8 years. So if you could go back to before you ever started doing your own business, what's one piece of advice you would give to yourself to maybe, I don't know, you know, like get through some stumbling blocks, or maybe, like not have to go through some roadblocks, things like that.
I think sometimes there are the pieces when you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes
Mm,
you just need to take the package and, run with it,
yeah.
and not always overthink. Because I think
Hmm.
what happens is we have a good plan, we move with it, and because it doesn't move fast enough, or because it doesn't move in exactly the way we think it does, then we feel like we have to disassemble the whole thing and start over again.
Yeah.
And I think that's not necessarily what we have to do. The other piece probably would be that, again, because we sometimes don't feel confident, then we feel like we have to ask everybody. And all that happens is you end up being confused.
Yeah.
It's like being a little kid and your parents will tell you you can't eat from everybody's table.
Yep. It's so important to trust our own intuition too, right? Like trust our own gut, and not, not what other people are doing isn't necessarily what we need to be doing. So yeah, I love that. So, so what piece of advice would you give to someone who is thinking about starting a business, or maybe they've started it, but it's really not going anywhere and they want it to grow? What would be like your number one piece of advice for them?
Figure out what you really want to do. What makes your heart happy? What would, if when you wake up in the morning, what makes you so darn excited about doing it? When you can figure that piece out, and then you can figure out, okay, now what are the pieces that are under? I think there's so much more technology now than there was when I started, that you can get a lot of things already pre-done for you. You just need to tweak them for you, and that wasn't the case.
Yeah. So okay, yeah, and now we have AI too, right? Like that speeds up all kinds of stuff. Chat GPT is my new best friend. That is my virtual assistant.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, thank you so much for answering all these questions. This has been such a good session. I've enjoyed getting to know you a little bit, and I just love your story. So before we end, I would like for you to tell everyone where they can find you, your website, social links, where they can get your books, all the things.
Yeah. So really, if you just go to J. Michelle Vann, Vann has two N's at the end. VANN, V as in Victor, ANN. If you just go to jmichellevann.com, you can find everything there. My social links are there. My other sites that you can get books and coaching and freebies and who I am, everything is pretty much there in that one space.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. It has been a pleasure to speak with you and get to know you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And so everyone go to jmichellevann.com, get her books, follow her on socials, book a coaching call. And we are all about women supporting women. So let's support each other. And thank you guys for watching today. This has been another episode of the High Vibe CEO Show. We'll see you next time.